We're going to kick off tonight's town hall meeting. Thank you all for joining us. We've got our executive chairman, David Jolly, joining us, and we're going to start with a national news update, and we're going to jump into some Pennsylvania news, talk a little bit about what's attracting people to SAM and what our strategy here is in Pennsylvania. And then we're going to take questions from the audience. So feel free to start typing those in. If you hit chat button, you can either send stuff to the hosts and panelists or to everyone. We'll be monitoring both of those chats. And we've got folks sending in other questions as well. So we'll do some Q&A and we'll walk through the next steps after that. So with that, I'll hand it over to David Jolly, who can give us an update on all the exciting news that's going on in the world of the Serve America movement.
That's right. Thank you. So Ethan and Kyle, to the SAM PA team, and also to everybody attending tonight, thank you for pulling this together. SAM is growing, and as I was just sharing with the team here, I'm going to drop off after the national update because we have one of these forums happening for SAM Missouri right now. And to provide additional context, I've just gotten back today from a SAM Connecticut visit and an organizing session in Rhode Island. So as you can tell from my description, things are really growing at SAM. For those who are new to SAM, maybe this is the first time conversation, the Serve America movement is it's a coalition of independent-minded, reform-minded voters from the right, left, and the middle, all over the political spectrum, but committed to restoring some type of balance in what is otherwise this duopoly that seems to just create this pendulum effect back and forth. And so we do organize state chapters like we have here in Pennsylvania with the ultimate goal of becoming a competitive party, competitive political party. We do believe that the nation would be better served with multiple political parties, 3, 4, maybe 5. And SAM ultimately believes that we can create a coalition of like-minded, problem-solving people committed to basic tenets of transparency, accountability, civility in politics. And we can build a coalition that can be a competitive force. In some states, we are not yet a political party. You know, we have filed party formation paperwork in Pennsylvania, but that's not the case in every state. In some states, we're focused on electoral reform initiatives as simply an advocacy group. But here's the really good news in terms of our national efforts. We now have filed party paperwork in 4 states, Connecticut, New York, Texas, and Pennsylvania. In Connecticut, you will see a SAM candidate elected mayor of the town of Newtown, Connecticut. It's actually called the First Selectman. But this November, they have an off-year election. The incumbent mayor dropped his Democratic affiliation and registered as a SAM candidate and turned around and got endorsed by the Republicans and Democrats and will be elected the mayor of Newtown here in a couple of weeks. So in Connecticut, we are electing SAM candidates. In Texas, look for a slate of candidates to run. We also will be competitive in several New York races. We're in, as I mentioned, Missouri tonight, Rhode Island as well, Minnesota, the Carolinas. We're growing across the country. So Ethan, Ann, Kyle, everybody here on this call tonight, thank you for your participation. We believe Pennsylvania is a really good place where we can particularly start in some of the local races, but also ultimately have an impact through endorsements and statewide races as well. So thank you very much, folks.
Thank you very much, David, and good luck on the Missouri call, the Show Me State.
That's right.
Excellent. So that's what we're doing at the national level. Lots of stuff going on. If you're on Twitter, you'll see that SAM folks are active and lots of people tweeting back and forth. We're going to shift gears a little bit and go into some Pennsylvania updates. And I've asked our Vice Chair, Ann Womble, if she would give us a quick update on sort of the state of democracy in Pennsylvania.
Well, thanks. Thanks, Ethan. I haven't had an awful lot of time to think about this today. I'm down here in North Carolina, actually on vacation with some of my college roommates. But, you know, the truth is probably anyone on this call could answer this question just as well as I can, because I think we're all here because of varying states of concern to alarm about what is happening in American democracy in general. And we are really at ground center of a lot of this here in Pennsylvania. Of course, the state of affairs is a hyper polarized environment, as we all know. The national political news and the national political narrative has really become the local narrative everywhere. And even, what we see now on a daily, weekly basis are the intimidation tactics and the, threats of violence even occurring at local meetings like our school board meetings. And I'm not going, it concerns me, all of the rhetoric and the rise of violent tactics on the right and in the Republican Party, because that's what my background, that's where I came from in this. But of course, there are things to be concerned about in both of the major parties. I think there's a lot of pressure right now in the elections that we're facing just in a couple of weeks here in Pennsylvania. And of course, this will be a big issue next year in 2022, to almost have the activists on both sides are really encouraging their voters to almost think of the American system as a parliamentary system instead of representative democracy. Now, what do I mean by that? I think it used to always be assumed that, when you run for an office that is a representative office, so for example, a state legislator, you are running in order to represent the constituents in your district. And now the pressure is on big time everywhere to recruit candidates who will toe the party line. And what I mean is the national party line, whatever that means. It's very hard for Democrats to recruit what we would think of as moderate or pragmatic candidates because of the pressure from the progressive left. And of course, the same thing is underway in the Republican Party in candidates needing to demonstrate some level, a large degree of fealty to Donald Trump himself as a person. And so many aspects of the Republican Party have become very cult-like and bent toward, authoritarianism in the sense of whatever means necessary to achieve our ends. The overriding feeling, I think, in politics these days is being driven by not hope and optimism and the old, Reagan cheerfulness or the, upbeat idea of American greatness, but it is being driven on all levels by fear and intimidation and just, a need to dominate or to eliminate people that, are not like us or do not, conform to what we've always considered, traditional values or something. And so I think that's a very disturbing development in politics in general. Resentment, of course, fear and resentment, I think is what has taken over. So what's happening here in Pennsylvania? Why do we need to pay attention? And why do we need to band together and organize something new? Well, a lot of the same dynamics that I've just been describing are happening right here. Now, of course, next year, we are going to be in the center of the national media spotlight. Well, really, we already are. Open governor's seat and an open United States Senate seat. And on the Republican side, at least, there's a lot of disarray in the candidate pool for both governor and Senate. There doesn't seem to be a lot of coalescing around any given candidate, and there's a lot of infighting amongst so-called Republicans who want to stay in the party and try to reform the party or try to turn it back to what it used to be. But the stronger influence in the Republican Party are demanding, fealty and loyalty to this sort of Trumpist pro-authoritarian movement, including a number of bills that have either been passed or are pending in the legislature to change the ways in which elections are run, whether that be how votes are cast, or more importantly and more perniciously, how votes are counted. And depending on the kinds of changes that may go through, because of the Republican-led legislature, that sets us up in Pennsylvania and nationally for a battle royale in 2024. And the smart people that I read, almost to a person, everyone is, no one knows exactly what to expect come 2024. So what do we do about it? Now, this is all bleak and bad, and I feel terrible talking so negatively, but Ethan and I and a few others really came together around the idea of, finally, can we put our past work, our past experience, and our understandable concern about the United States of America and the future of democracy, can we put it to an effort to truly form a third party movement that is concentrated on reforming these elements to tamp down this dangerous time we're in. I'd like to point you to an article. I'll put it in the chat, a link to it. And I apologize if it's behind a firewall, but it's an article that was written about a month ago in the Washington Post by a gentleman named Robert Kagan. And the name of the article is, Our Constitutional Crisis is Already Here. And I'm afraid it's a very dire picture, but it shows how, here we have a tanking Democrat Party nationally. The president's numbers are not looking good. There's been no major legislative victories, and he's kind of running out of time on that, because when we hit 2022, it all turns toward the election again. And if there's not a strong and sane Democrat Party to at least beat back the worst elements that are going on in the Republican Party right now, then we're looking at probably a return of that hyper-authoritarian version of the Republican Party that will be smarter and more well-organized than they were in 2020. So Sam, okay, so what are we doing here? The reform, I think, is the watchword of what we're all about. And we've written an article that's been published locally here in Lancaster, but also has been picked up by a few other newspapers in Pennsylvania. And I think what we are looking to do with your help in building a coalition of folks that understand the dangers of the time that we're in, want to band together to make positive reforms, but also prevent negative reforms from occurring right before our eyes. And this is a time where it's important to remember that there's something that supersedes our initial inclinations to want to, hew to the platform of the party that maybe we have always been loyal to. In my case, Republican Party, maybe in your case, it was the Democratic Party. But now is the time to say, what's more important than those platform matters is saving democracy. And I heard somebody make this comparison recently, and I thought it was kind of a good way of thinking about it. If you're on a plane and the plane is heading to crash on the ground, and all you're thinking about and complaining about is, your high cholesterol levels that may kill you one day, instead of thinking about the danger that's right in front of your eyes, well, you're going to be in a pretty bad place real quick. And so, that's kind of a summary of what I have to say. And I'm happy to be a part of this effort. And it's going to be a new ground. We're building new ground here. And so we welcome your participation and your ideas and your willingness to work with coalitions of people that maybe you never had before, and maybe I never have before, but that's what American democracy is all about. And I think that's why we need to stick together in this effort. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you, Ann. And have fun down there in the South. Yeah, I was just thinking a little bit about what you said. Yesterday morning, you probably got the same email. One of our county commissioners sent out an email to try to get out the vote for the Republican Party here. And in about a couple sentences, he mentioned the word fight 3 or 4 times. And there was nothing in that entire email that had anything to do with the county commissioner's office, but it was all about socialism, disasters in Afghanistan, hordes of immigrants coming across the southern border, roaring inflation that's destroying our country, school board races and critical. I mean, it's the national talk show from the right wing could just be restated, and it's the email coming from your local county commissioner to get out the vote for judicial elections that also don't impact any of those issues. So yes, we've got the ramp up of the rhetoric that says we need to fight, but then along comes Sam that says we should actually sit down like common sense people, discuss the options, have full transparency, and actually govern. So we're going to shift gears a little bit.
Excuse me, Ethan, do you mind if I answer one quick question that
Sure.
was just put in the chat? Is Sam coordinating with RAM? RAM is the Renew America movement.
Go for it.
I can answer that, sort of. Somebody on here from Sam may have a better answer, but I brought that up with David Jolly early on, and he has reached out and, has been attempting that. They are not interested in working with us right now. I think they have not yet totally come to the place of realizing that, really putting our efforts behind a third party movement is the important work that's needed today. So RAM, yeah, I think we're probably ideological allies in a lot of ways, but they are not interested in working with Sam right now.
Yeah, I would say when I look at the Renew America movement, they're folks, a lot of them are old friends of mine. There's friends of Congressman Jolly's got a few friends in RAM. I know in 2016, I voted for Evan McMullin when he ran for president, and he just announced he's running for the Senate in Utah, so as an independent candidate. So I would say we're all paddling in the same direction. So if we want 6 parties, RAM would be a great party. So you could have the Democrats, Republicans, RAM, SAM, Forward, Libertarians, Green Party, Reform Party. There's plenty of warm water. So it will be interesting to see how they recruit candidates and start running them. So I think that's the more interesting one to watch, especially Evan McMullin's race in Utah. So I've asked Kyle. Kyle's is a newcomer to SAM, but he's not a newcomer to third party movements. So he's been around the block a little bit. Tell us a little bit about yourself, Kyle, and what attracted you to the SAM party.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kyle. I'm graduated University of Delaware. Over the last year, I've been organizing a third party called the Middle Party, which is purple and has a lot of the same principles as SAM. So why I'm so interested in SAM, it's a lot of the reasons that David and Ann already touched on. I just think there needs to be a movement to move politics backwards into the direction of compromise, where as a democracy to function, we need to just take the best ideas and work together and push forward. And I don't want to see the next generation and the generation after that have to be stuck in the 2-party politics we're stuck in now, because like Ann and David already said, it's just not tenable with what's going on. So that's why I'm so interested in SAM.
I also saw, Kyle, you got a little bit of Twitter fame the other day. Who did you meet out in Philadelphia?
Yeah, so I actually got to talk to Andrew Yang. Got to talk to him about SAM. He was speaking in Philly about the Forward Party, and he was saying how he was already talking to Sam and how we're like all aligned. So it was great, and I loved everything he has to say. I've been reading his new book. I mean, it seems like we're all on the same wave, like you said with RAM. We share a lot of the same things. So.
Yeah, it almost seems like we're at a cusp of something new. It's the first time in my political career where I've seen so many new folks jumping into this third party world. So you've got SAM. We've been around for a couple of years. I'm a newcomer to SAM. You've got RAM, which is more in that center right coalition. piece. You've got Forward, which is Andrew Yang's group. Recently, you had David French and Jonah Goldberg on the Dispatch calling for a center-right coalition or a new party to be formed. So I've seen more conversations about third parties in the last 6-7 months than I have in the last probably 10 years of my involvement in politics. So we're all partners in the same movement, trying to figure out the best way. And this is the beauty of the American system. We can actually try this. So one party may stick in Pennsylvania, one may stick in New Jersey, one may be big in Utah, another in Tennessee. This idea that we have to have all national parties is a little bit outdated as well. You can have multiple parties in different states. And I think that's part of what I'll talk about a little bit next is the strategy of how we get there. There's a great book, well, 2 great books I pull off my shelf here, but if you haven't read Lee Drutman's Breaking the Two-Party Doom Loop, this is an excellent book. You can also check him out on Sam Studio. There's a podcast with David Jolly and him talking about how we can do this. Then there's also another book. This is a little more research-based, but you'll see David Jolly's on there. And this is Structural Challenges to Bipartisanship in America. And that's the problem that we're really facing, which is how do we move past this two-party duopoly? Because Lee Drutman in his book has said multiple times, we used to actually have a multi-party system. We had different wings inside of each major party that allowed compromise to get done. You look back in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, we've got a great history of bipartisanship and different coalitions being built. And I look back in history, not too distant history, people that I've met and people on this call have met, but Governor Tom Ridge couldn't win a Republican primary today in Pennsylvania. Governor Bob Casey Sr. couldn't win a Democrat primary in Pennsylvania today. Those coalitions have been essentially ostracized and kicked out of their respective parties. And so we now actually have a true two-party system. And what we're seeing is the result of that two-party system. So the question is, how do we move to a multi-party democracy in America? Well, we start at the state level. And that's one of the things that attracted me to SAM is it's got a bottom-up approach to politics that says, let's start at the state level. So the question then becomes, how do we get to a multi-party Commonwealth of Pennsylvania? And that's where we have to start looking at this good old-fashioned organizing, excuse me. So if the objective is we need to become a multi-party Commonwealth, how do we get there when the rules are written by the major parties and they don't want anyone else coming in? Well, we're getting to a point where we're starting to see some fissures, and there are folks in both parties who do see some of the similar problems, which is why we're supporting initiatives that are being pushed by other groups in Pennsylvania, like the Open Primaries Initiative. There's actually a Senate bill put into place that would actually open up the Pennsylvania primaries for the first time. That would allow anyone, when they go to vote, to choose either Republican or a Democrat ballot. And that would go a good step in the right direction. So we're seeing folks, even in the Senate on both sides of the aisle, recognize that we're dysfunctional in Harrisburg right now. So getting to open primaries is one way to do that. But the main way to do that is we actually need to elect people who that is part of their platform when they get elected, is to start introducing legislation and, more importantly, potential constitutional amendments to actually get us to be a multi-party democracy. We don't need that many folks. And so SAM really has a 3-part approach to how we're going to achieve that. The first one is we're going to run our own candidates. So we're recruiting candidates. I've had lots of good conversations with candidates across the state, everywhere from Pittsburgh to Montgomery County to Chester to Lancaster and everywhere in between. There's people who are interested in running. So we need more folks interested in running. And we're going to do candidate trainings to help get them on the ballot and then get them elected. So that's one way we're trying to do it. The second way is there are good common sense Democrats and Republicans out there who are actually trying to do good bipartisan reform. And you see glimmers of hope in that in the legislature in Pennsylvania, whether it's Dan Laughlin or Sheriff Street in Philadelphia. You're seeing folks actually talk about ways that they can work together. So we'll be endorsing candidates in major parties, excuse me, where it makes most sense. And then thirdly, we're going to try to encourage other parties to run too. So if it's a Libertarian Party candidate, a Green Party candidate, Forward candidate, a Ram Party candidate, we're encouraging them to run too, because we need everyone in this organization together, all moving in the same direction to try to move us to a multi-party Commonwealth. So if we can build that coalition, you only need 6, 7, 8 folks in the state house to hold up the legislature and say, we want an up and down vote on moving towards a multi-party system in Pennsylvania. It still may fail, but we actually want to hold that vote. And with that vote, we can go back to the voters and start holding folks accountable. So it's a slow build. We're building towards 2022 is the big one. That's next year. And then each time we run a candidate in 2022, we build that list. We build that list of donors, that list of volunteers, that list of voters, so that in 2024, we'll do it again. In 26, we'll do it again. So it's a multi-year effort to slowly start to gain a foothold in Pennsylvania through endorsements, running candidates, and helping other people run as well. So that's the big thing we're doing here with calls like this, is recruiting candidates as well as donors and volunteers. So with that, we've been getting questions into the chat, and we've gotten other ones on Twitter and Facebook and email. So I'll read a few questions, and my throat's dying here, so I'll let Ann answer some of these, and Kyle, feel free to jump in if you want to answer some too.
Absolutely.
We did answer is the SAM coordinating with RAM question. I think we answered that one. Here's another question we've got there. This might be a good one for you, Ann. Why did you leave the GOP and not try to reform it from within?
Well, I left the party in 2016, June of 2016, when I knew that Donald Trump was going to be the nominee of the party. Now, my history is that I'm a lifelong Republican. I worked in Washington on Capitol Hill for 5 years after college. And then when I moved to Lancaster, eventually became involved in the local party and became the county chairman and was a delegate to the 2012 convention when Mitt Romney was the nominee. My decision was based on the horror of the idea that I was not sure Donald Trump was going to be elected president. In fact, at that time, I didn't think he would. But I decided I cannot be a member of a party who thinks it's perfectly fine to nominate a person like this to be president of the United States. It would be one thing if he were running for mayor of New York City or even governor of New York or something, but president of the United States. And then I saw the entire Republican Party leadership collapse toward that end, rather than circling together to prevent that kind of what I considered then and still consider today a complete abomination. So I was I left early. I did not think that that was going to be a situation where we were just sort of a little bit wayward on a couple of our policy things, and maybe we could, change those. I saw the Trump movement then, and it's unfortunately, I think, only gotten worse as an existential threat to, then the Republican Party and what I always believed it stood for, and why I was so proud to be a Republican, and the principles from, I came of age sort of politically during the Reagan era, of course, like many of us did. That's the time period in which I was in Washington. And the party was hopeful and optimistic and full of ideas. And it was about bringing people together and bringing people in. And first and foremost, it was about taking the policy stances that we said we believed in and using persuasion to grow the party, to grow the coalitions toward policy ideas. The Trump movement was completely and remains completely antithetical to that. I guess my own personal decision was, this is not going to be reformable from within. And I am sorry to say, it's probably one of the only times I feel like I've been kind of prescient in my life. It's only gotten horribly worse. And now, you know, barring some unforeseen situation, it is highly likely he is going to be the nominee of the party once again. And that the movement, the enthusiasm, you know, negative enthusiasm, I would say, behind all of that anti-authoritarianism, fear, resentment, disgust, you know, as Ethan said, fighting people, you know, hatred, tearing down people as individuals, not seeing our fellow Americans as Americans, but as somehow the enemy, or somehow, you know, needing to be, you know, banished, or now talk of secession. You know, these are not, we are at the cusp of, I'm afraid to tell you, that the most dangerous constitutional crisis since the Civil War. So I liken it, I do not feel like it being within the Republican Party has any value right now in reforming that party. I do believe there remain reasonable and good and practical Republicans, of course, but they are more than swamped and overshadowed by the so-called, you know, MAGA elements. So I wanted something that I could latch on to, that I felt was a positive way, instead of, you know, cursing, as they say, don't curse the darkness, light a candle. So this effort to me is a way to keep a smile on my face, to keep optimism going, and to hopefully make a difference in the political arena. Sorry if that was too long of an answer.
That's a great answer, Ann. Yeah, a quick answer for myself. I think the biggest one, and I still have friends who are both in the Republican Party apparatus, as well as friends who are in the Democrat Party apparatus. And I've had that question asked to me of both of them. And there's good folks fighting the fight to reform both parties, and they see the need for reform. And I think that's good. But for myself, I said, I think I can do the most good creating that external pressure. I think a multi-party system is going to be the best check and balance against runaway political power concentrated in two parties. So our founding fathers had a system of checks and balances. Unfortunately, I think the two-party duopoly has broken one of those checks and balances. So we need to restore another check and a balance on our two-party system, and that's going to require third parties and fourth parties and sixth parties jumping in. So we've got a couple more questions here. It looks like Michael sent in one. Ethan mentioned making Pennsylvania a multi-party commonwealth and taking a vote on it. Does the current system not allow for or limit folks outside the Dem Rep party from running or passing legislation? So anyone can run. So say a third party or an independent candidate won and got elected to the state house, they'd be allowed to vote. They'd be allowed to introduce legislation. But the speaker is going to determine what bills go up on the floor. So the committees, as well as the House leadership, is going to determine that. So if you're going to do anything meaningful, you need at least enough votes to sort of block all legislation. So if in a highly polarized system where you have a very close House, or it's even closer in the Senate, all you need is about 6 senators to come together and say, you know what? We want a vote on this bill, or we're not going to vote on any bills. And if that happens, then everything sort of comes to a halt. You're seeing right now that play out at the national level. Everyone's talking about Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema, because 2 senators in a highly partisan and divided Senate have the power to say, these are what we want in the bill or not in the bill. And if we don't get it, we're not voting on it. And no one else is willing to compromise even an inch. So, and that essentially gives those 2 people that power. So our goal is to get 1 or 2 people in who can be like a Joe Manchin or a Kristen Sinema, but for reforming the system and saying, here's how we move to a multi-party democracy. So that's sort of the strategy there, is we need to get our foot in the door, and then you build a coalition of existing major party candidates as well as new independent candidates. And that's how you get that pressure to allow your bill to get voted on. Because one person getting in just gets you a voice. You need a couple people to sort of force your stuff to get voted on.
One other thing if you don't mind, that I'd like to add on that. We think of the Democrats and the Republicans as being so much as opposite teams and hating each other and fighting, but there is one area where they collude and they are best of buddies, and that is in the matter of keeping third parties or candidates out and off the ballot. And this has been underway for years. We saw it from the Republican Party side when we had, both Ethan and I are former county chairs. At that time, we did have an interest in making sure that, there wasn't a heck of a lot of competition, for example. But, I see it with different eyes now. And competition is a good thing. The competition of ideas, competition of candidates, competition certainly improves the candidate pool, and it gives hope to people, serious people that are interested in serving as public officials, the hope that they could enter the arena, be taken seriously, not have to get caught up in all kinds of nonsense, and get good government legislation passed for the Commonwealth and for the nation. And right now, with this collusion that's underway and has been underway for a long time between the two major parties, preventing real competition from happening, we are, hampering our own Commonwealth and our own nation. And for that reason alone, I think we should all welcome the idea of third parties and more competition in politics.
Here's another good question from John in the chat. What can we do as a movement in Lancaster County to counter the animosity, hatred, and divisive politics here? It scares me as a Vietnam veteran to see this potential destruction of our democracy. Any thoughts on that, Kyle or Anna? What can we do to tamp down on that fight rhetoric that seems to be tearing our neighbors apart?
I would say it just starts with like having another option. Like right now, I don't think most people subscribe to that, but half the people will vote Republican because that's their only choice if they don't want to support a party that's maybe antithetical to a lot of their principles. So creating that other option, I think that just happens naturally over time, that people will resist the craziness. The people on the fringes will have to be stuck. If the Republican Party and the Democrat Party are going to stick to the fringes, then I think eventually they're just going to drive away more and more moderates. And I think that's what we're seeing now.
Well, I agree with that, but I also would say I think it's so important right now to really reach out to independents. I mean, the ranks of independents have been growing in Lancaster County. I'm one of them. As I said, I left the Republican Party in 2016, sort of feeling like I'm out here on an island, but the ranks of independents are growing. There's a reason for that. Disaffected with the Republican Party and disaffected with the Democratic Party, and waiting to see an alternative, and willing to think enough about the ballot in front of them to split their vote, and if needed. Of course, independents are prevented from voting in the primaries right now, and that needs to change. I think if you are not familiar with some of the reform concepts that are being talked about right now, such as ranked choice voting, I think it's worth your time to get familiar with that. I don't know everything about it, but I'm very intrigued. And if we were to implement in Pennsylvania, for example, a ranked choice voting system in the primaries and open it up to all voters, meaning, the two highest vote getters out of the primary, regardless of party, would then go on to compete in the general election. That's a reform certainly worth thinking about, and it's one that welcomes everyone into the democratic process. The history of primaries in this country, that's another bugaboo that we could talk about probably all night. But primaries, particularly closed primaries, are a major part of the problem right now in isolating people from feeling like they have a voice in the democratic system. Now, Lancaster County specifically that you're asking about, John, you know, it's disappointing to me what's happening. Ethan mentioned the commissioners. The commissioners are certainly getting bolder about their fight rhetoric. Now it's even you know, opposing private businesses and any kinds of policies that private businesses decide to put into place to protect their employees or to protect the general public. You know, used to the Republican Party was all about reducing regulation and allowing private businesses to operate as they wanted to, but the commissioners are now, strangely enough, all for big government, as long as that big government is going to impose you know, regulations that it agrees with. Unfortunately, also our congressman, ever since he's been elected, has felt no need to hold a town hall meeting with the general public. And you know, I'm sorry to say, but he's rewarded for that. And he's rewarded for kowtowing only to the hardcore Republican base, because at least for the time being, he believes that that's all he needs to do. I mean, the old way of thinking that once you're elected as a representative, you represent all the constituents in your district, not just the ones that voted for you. Well, that's out the door in a safe red district. It's, you know, same thing in a blue district, and that is not the way it's supposed to be. Congressman Smucker, you know, needs to feel a little bit like, you know, more of the heat. And what I mean by heat is competition of ideas, and having to answer and you know, fight, if you will, and I put that in quotes, via means of persuasion in the public square. And I think that's what we're trying to bring back, is the old notion of the public square, where competition of ideas is how you approach elections and winning, you know, an election.
And if you go to the jointsam.org website and click on our platform, I think this might answer a couple questions at the same time. But one of our key platform pieces, which is more of a principle, is how you go about engaging in public discourse. So the first step is how we solve problems. We need to listen. And that goes back to Ann talking about holding town hall meetings where you actually take questions from people and answer them. Leading by example when our candidates run for office, to say you're going on listening tours. I mean, I've been a candidate in the past. I was a candidate in 2016 for the Senate. I knocked on over 10,000 doors, but those were all targeted 4Y Republican super voters that I knew were going to vote in that primary. I'm looking forward to campaigning for SAM candidates and knocking on doors and not worried about who's going to open the door. Actually knocking on Republican, Democrat, and independent doors, or just knocking on every door. It's a very freeing concept. And there's nothing that I think breaks down that animosity and hatred is when you actually get to put a face in real life with the candidate. So knocking on doors and engaging in that politics of persuasion, as opposed to what sort of the major parties do, which is all about driving out their base and increasing base turnout. It's going back and saying, all right, we're going to knock on someone's door and then talk to them for 5-10 minutes, not just drop a piece of literature and say, are you registered to vote? Are you going to vote? Do you have a ride to the polls? It's more, what are the key issues that are facing your street and your neighborhood? It's getting back to that actual local politics where we talk about how we fix potholes, how we put food on the table, where are we getting our food from? Do we have enough grocery stores? Are we getting enough farms preserved in your area? Those local issues, I think, are what starts to tone down that heat. And then when we actually talk to people and look them in the eye, it humanizes people. So that's one of the key pieces is defining, listening, inviting people into that conversation, and then repeating that process. All right, let's get another question here so I have to talk. Will SAM candidates just be spoilers and get Democrats elected? The old spoiler question. Are we spoilers for Democrats? And I've gotten the same one on Twitter as well. I've been accused of being a Democrat plant, and I've been accused of being a Republican plant to try to spoil the races for whichever team that person is not on. What is your answer, Kyle or Ann, to are we just spoilers for the major parties?
Well, I would say no, because I don't think many people feel represented by the major parties. And whether it's in a blue district or a red district, it's a diverse group. So it's not just this, so I think as far as a spoiler, I mean, it's just giving other people another chance. So I don't know. I think that question at this point, I mean, Congress nationally has a 20% approval rating. So at a certain point, we have to try something new.
Well, I guess I would say I would go a little bit further than that too. And for the time being, I don't mind if Sam does end up being a spoiler against the Republican Party right now, because as I say, I lifelong Republican up to 2016. But I believe that right now we are in a moment where there's only one of the major parties that continues to be committed to the notion of democracy. And that happens to be the Democratic Party. Now, I'm not talking about their policies, and there's a lot of problems there. The Democratic Party is a coalition party, more so than sort of a principles party, if you will. There's certainly a lot of the policies that are driving the party right now that I don't agree with. However, they are not the party that is attempting to change the rules of engagement, the constitutional order. They are not the party that is trying to really upend democracy. And I mean, when we really think about what happened on January 6th, that was an order of magnitude different. And in fact, not only an order of magnitude different, but it was different in kind from the kinds of protests that had been happening during the summer over things that people didn't like. And some of those protests were violent, and there's no question about it. Portland and Minneapolis or Milwaukee and other places were certainly violent. But storming the Capitol of the United States with the intention to stop the peaceful transfer of power is an existential threat to democratic norms in this country. And right now, and I mentioned how the thought process now is a lot more toward a parliamentary type of system. And what I mean by that is, of course, we're not a parliamentary system, but in parliamentary systems, the idea is we just need to get a majority of people elected who happen to be members of our party, and thereby we will control the levers of the national government. Our party will. It is not the same thing as representing an area, representative democracy. We have two examples right now going on. They've already been mentioned, Kristen Sinema and Joe Manchin, who are defying their party, not because they're Republicans in, Republicans in Democrat clothing, but because they are truly representing their constituents. And that is exactly the kind of system and process that we need to be preserving. So the spoiler question, do I mind if we spoil some of these hardcore anti-democracy, pro-authoritarian type Republican candidates who are attempting to be elected on all levels of government right now? No, I do not.
All right. Another tactical piece of that is over 26% of all of the state house races in Pennsylvania were unchallenged in the general election. So if you look at the races across Pennsylvania where no one's even running in the general, there's no contest. There's a Republican running or a Democrat running, and often they're not even opposed in the primary. So a quarter of Pennsylvanians never even get a choice at all about who supports them. So we're targeting those races first, where we don't actually have to necessarily be a spoiler or not. We'll be one of two candidates on the ballot. So that would be the one. And then the other option is in a really tight race. We could be a spoiler, or we could stay out. And if there's a good candidate running on either the Republican or Democrat side who's demonstrated, as one of the people said in the chat, SAM principles of governing, then we would endorse one of those candidates in a really close race, because it wouldn't make sense to spoil if there's a good candidate. But if you've got two rotten candidates, they're already spoiled. And then we give someone we give people someone that they can choose to vote for, not just someone they can vote against. And that act in and of itself of voting for somebody, even if they lose, increases that engagement in democracy. We've got another question in the chat here. How about moderate Republicans who are a little more dug in? Is there a specific tactic or argument that's been more effective at breaking through and have them open to the idea of voting for someone other than a Republican? And he also follows up, I feel like 99% of people already have their minds made up. I think the big piece is holding town halls like this. So one of our tactics as we go through into the fall, you're going to have lots of folks announcing. Ben Shapiro just officially announced that Josh Shapiro announced he's running for governor of Pennsylvania. You've got folks announcing they're running for the 18th congressional district. You just had another one announced today. So over the next couple months, especially once we finish up the election here, so November, December, and January, you're probably going to see thousands of announcements of I'm running for office. What we're going to be doing is trying to do short videos of folks like myself, like Ann, like Kyle, like you guys on the call here, where we talk through and say, hey, I'm a Democrat or I'm a Republican, and I'm thinking of voting for a SAM party candidate. It's giving people permission. So it's leading by example and stepping up and giving them that permission. Because it is difficult. If you've been raised your whole life to do one thing, to step out can be difficult. But the good thing is we're going to give you choices at the ballot box, and then we'll see how it goes from there. But people don't have to change their registration. You can be a Democrat who loves SAM. You can be a SAM Democrat. You can be a SAM Republican. You can be a SAM Libertarian, and you can be a SAM Green Party person. So that's sort of how I would answer some of those ones. That's the tactic we're taking, is we want to give people a choice, and then see where we go from there. Another question we have here is SAM endorsing any candidates of Pennsylvania for the upcoming election in the fall. So the answer to that is we have not endorsed any candidates in the fall. We've got judicial elections coming up, and it would be interesting. I'll put you on the spot, guys. I'll be honest, I have not decided who I'm voting for in the judicial election this fall. It's one of the few times where I haven't met all of the candidates and talked to them. Like when I was much more closely involved in politics, I got to meet more of the candidates. It was also in the pre-COVID days and the pre-kids days. So I got to travel around and meet candidates a lot more. So what is your thought process? This is non-official SAM here. But as you approach these judicial races, what issues are you looking at for some of these candidates as you make your decision for Commonwealth, Superior, and Supreme Court in Pennsylvania?
Well, the old line we always used to hew to in the Republican Party was we were against so-called judicial activism, right? Just rule according to the way the law is written, and there's really kind of shied away from the notion of living, breathing constitution, and all that sort of thing. Now, I would tell you, I'm not going to. I don't know enough about the individual candidates speak specifically, but what I will say is I just want to make everyone aware. The Republican Party has really moved very far away from that. And what do I mean by that? Most people that defend their vote in 2016 and 2020 for Donald Trump, but a lot of people, I don't want to say most, many people will say, well, I wanted the judges, right? I was all there for the judges. Well, I'd like to ask you to think about what that means. What they mean most of the time is they wanted conservative judges to rule for conservative policies, not to be non-activists on the court, but in fact to be activists toward conservative policies. So that's judicial activism, just like liberal judges would be for supposedly for active rulings toward the ends of liberal policies. So I don't think the Republican Party means what it used to mean anymore about we are against judicial activism. But if you truly are against judicial activism, as am I for the most part, I'm looking for someone who has very, very solid credentials in terms of their legal education, in terms of their experience in the courtroom, perhaps past judicial experience. I'm no lawyer, so I don't know exactly how to determine, the quality of their rulings or whatever, but I think there are ways to find those things out. And I think what we really do want from our judges, regardless of what the issue is, whether it's a Supreme Court matter or whether it's a state court matter, I think we really do want judges who are there to simply interpret the law, stay within the boundaries of the Constitution of the United States and the state constitution as written, and not do the reading into it what they'd like the outcome to be. Unfortunately, we have had some very active judicial activists on the Pennsylvania Supreme Court in recent years, the other way. And I just, that's what's important to me in the judicial races.
Any thoughts, Kyle?
I would say I haven't really fully made up my mind. I have to, I guess, do some last due diligence. But I guess I would say I'm sort of leaning towards the Republican, just because it would make the court 4-3 instead of 5-2 for the Democrats. And like she alluded to, I know that the Democrat Supreme Court with their decision making, like with the congressional maps and stuff, I'm not sure if I really like those decisions. So kind of, it's like I feel like a regular voter. I'm like trying to pick between what's like the least worst. So I don't know if I want to try and balance it out more, or I don't know.
Yeah, I'll give a little perspective. I like your thoughts of a closer divided court might get us some better rulings. Commonwealth Court 1 is one where any election challenges are going to go before the Commonwealth Court. So if you're concerned about challenges at the state level moving up, any county challenges, the prime one would be out in Allegheny County in the last cycle. So though the Commonwealth Court does rule on the election ones, I'd say my perspective is I don't think we should elect judges in the first place. And there's a couple bills to fix that in the House, but moving towards a sort of a merit-based appointment for judges, I think would be a much better approach. So that's where I'm at. I'm looking at for the first time considering election day challenges moving up to the Commonwealth Court as being a much higher priority for me in my vote this time than it was in the last 20 years of my voting career. So there's a lot of stuff out there on the judges races. Go out, see who endorses who. That tells you a lot. See who's donating money. That tells you a lot. If you like who's donating the money, then that's probably your candidate. Because unfortunately, judges can't say a whole lot on most of these issues. So we're just going to wrap things up here. Some great questions. in the chat. Lots of great stuff coming here. And if you have more, feel free to shoot us an email. Make sure you go to the website, joinsam.org. And thank you very much for joining us as we try to build a new kind of a party for Pennsylvania and hopefully make things a little less crazy and a little more sane. And let's make politics boring again. How about that? So thank you all for coming, and we'll sign off. Have a great night.
Thank you.